Allahi wa barakatuh. So, as you know, we're reaching the end of Ramadan, the last few nights, right? We ask Allah that He accepts all of our good deeds, that He forgives any shortcomings we had. And we know that this month really offers a lot of benefits for all of us, right? There's blessings in our time. Some people say after fasting, get much more clear-headed and able to think better. So there's a lot of benefits during this month. We just spoke about Laylatul Qadr, right? So that's a huge benefit. But it can also be difficult during this time as well, right? We fast the entire day. Sometimes we get tired and we may get more angry than usual, or just really more fatigued than usual. Some of us have to go to work or go to school or stay up all day taking care of kids. So we all have challenges during this month as well. But for many of us, by now we're very good at this, right? We've done it for so many years. It becomes almost like second nature when Ramadan starts. It may be hard in the beginning, and then we get used to it. Right, so for some people, for myself, it's my 10th Ramadan, right? For some of us, maybe our 30th or 40th or 50th Ramadan, alhamdulillah, right? But for some, it's their first or second Ramadan, right? And that makes it very, very difficult, and can be a very difficult time for them. So, today what I want to talk about is a vulnerable population within our community. So in like the medical field, for example, when we talk about a vulnerable population, it's people who have trouble getting good access to healthcare, like people with who are very old, for example, or who are disabled, or who have developmental disabilities. That's called a vulnerable population in the healthcare field, right? So in our community, I think one of our biggest vulnerable populations is our reverts, and our new reverts especially, that have just entered the fold of Islam and who are joining our community. So how many of us here are reverts? Anyone? No? How many of us here know someone who is a revert? Does anyone know me? Yeah? Okay, so everyone should be raising their hand, right? Alhamdulillah. And how many of us here are born Muslims? How many of us here are born Muslims? Right, probably most people here, right? Alhamdulillah. So over the past two mornings, if any of you have been here, we've heard from an experienced revert brother Dawood, who's been a big part of our masjid, may Allah bless him. And then yesterday we heard from two new reverts who reverted this year, Brother Dejan and Brother Yusuf. So may Allah keep them and all of us on the straight path. So today I want to talk a little bit about my story, but what I really want to talk about more is our obligation to our revert brothers and sisters that have just entered Islam, and what we really have to do for them to make them feel welcome in our community. So, caring for our reverts is something that's really important and really incumbent upon us as a community, because being a revert is not an easy task, right? So I reverted 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, during Ramadan, alhamdulillah, and it took a few years for me to get to that point to become Muslim. So I grew up in a Christian family, and we went to church, and I did go to Sunday school and communion and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't really believe much of it. So when I went to college, I didn't really have any belief in anything. Not really atheist, no denying it, but just no belief in anything. But while in college, I met a few good friends who happened to be Muslim, and I always had an academic interest in religion and just learning more about different religions. So I would ask them a lot of questions, and I found certain parts very interesting. For example, how many of the prophets that we believe in as Muslims were very similar to the stories I learned in Sunday school, how many rules in Islam had a logical foundation that made a lot of sense. So, Islam, I really had an appreciation for Islam, even though I had no intention to change my religion or anything like that. But, just out of interest, I would even go to the masjid sometimes. I would fast during Ramadan once in a while. But then later on, while we were still in college, one of our classmates died. Not one of my Muslim friends, but one of our classmates died, and that made me really think a lot about my own death, and just knowing about what I learned from my friends, what could await someone who died as a non-Muslim, with Jahannam and all the punishments that are there. So that really kind of brought it really home to me. So that's one thing that played a big role in me becoming Muslim. And then the other thing was the akhlaq, right, the manners of my friends. So, they're very down to earth, very good people, alhamdulillah, may Allah preserve them and their families. But they also, they had very, very good manners. So, for example, my closest friend, I would go to his house, his mom would give me biryani, and we would have study groups there, and they were very, very welcoming. I felt like part of their family. And that, I think, also played a huge role in seeing what a Muslim truly should be. Right? It's not just the praying and all the ritual acts, but it's all of the akhlaq and all the good manners and being a good person overall that we should be as well. And I think that played a huge role in also me becoming Muslim. Right? So it's not just about having praying and fasting and having the beard and wearing the thobe and all of that stuff. Right? It's really It's really how we treat our fellow brother. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told us that none of us have faith until we love for our brother, until we love for ourselves. Which means not that we if we don't love for our brother what we love for ourselves, like we got a new car and we don't want we want every one of our brothers to have a new car, and if we don't believe that, then we're not Muslim anymore. It's not like that. But it means our faith is not perfected until we love for our brother what we love for ourselves. But that really shows us how much how important brotherhood and sisterhood really is in our religion. So alhamdulillah, after all of that, after spending a lot of time with my friends and all that, I entered into the fold of Islam. So one would think that once you enter into Islam, it becomes easier after that. Right now you're Muslim, that burden is lifted off you. You know the purpose and the meaning of life, and it's smooth sailing from there on. From there on out. But it's actually not as easy when you become Muslim, and the reason is there's actually a lot of isolation, right? So when you first become Muslim, you see like all the brothers are really happy in the masjid. Some they go up and give you hugs and they give you money even sometimes and all of this stuff. But then then you're kind of alone, right? And sometimes the isolation never really like fully goes away. So for those of us who are born Muslim, right? Think about your life up until now. Right, so you grew up in a Muslim household, your parents are Muslim, your grandparents, you grew up knowing about Ramadan and how to pray and wudu and all of this stuff. It's like second nature to you. And of course, growing up in a Muslim family also has challenges, right? It's not like it's easy if you just grow up in a Muslim family. There will be other challenges as well, but there's also a huge amount of benefit. So imagine if you grew up in a different kind of household, right? Where you went to church or the synagogue or the temple every week, or maybe your family was atheist, there was no religious belief. And then you hear about Muslims on the news. You hear about things like ISIS or 9/11 or all these kind of things. So now people get a bad impression of Islam, right? Without knowing what it truly is, without even knowing who Muslims really are. And then, they also, if you even see Muslims in school or at work, they seem a little weird. They don't eat at certain times. They dress differently, right? They may, speak differently. Like they just seem different from the norm. So, people like that, you may get a very different view of what Muslims are. And then imagine somehow, Allah guides you to Islam, and now you're the only Muslim in your family. And oftentimes families may be accepting, but sometimes they're not. And they have all of these kind of preconceived notions of what Islam is, and then you kind of embody that negative image of Islam. And there's something can be a lot of antagonism that goes on with that. So sure, you have a masjid you can go to, right? You have a Muslim community, but in many ways you feel very alone because your family is really what's closest to you. And sometimes even your friends disappear when you become Muslim because you don't enjoy the same things anymore, like you don't go partying or you don't drinking or whatever it is. So you feel very, very isolated, right? And then you have all these new things you have to learn which don't feel natural at first, like doing wudu or fasting and all this stuff may be very new. And then sometimes brothers come in or sisters come and start like bombarding you with different things, like, oh brother, you have to change your name. Your name can't be John anymore, now you have to be called Yusuf. And you're like, I was called John my whole life. How can you change my name like that? Right? How am I supposed to do that? Or they say, brother, you have to keep the beard now, and you've been used to shaving your whole life, right? And you're not used to doing that. Or they say, oh brother, you have to get circumcised now, and that sounds scary for any of us, right? If you can imagine what that would be like, you just became Muslim until you have to go through something like that. So all of these things, you start feeling isolated for the community. You start feeling like maybe you're not even a good Muslim. Like, why did you even become Muslim? Because you can't even do all these things like keep the beard and wear the thobe and fast easily and all of this. So it leads to more of that isolation. And that's not everybody, but there are people who definitely feel like this when they become Muslim. So I want to talk about a brother that I know who converted almost a year from now, almost a year ago. And he grew up in a very, very strict Catholic household, where he went to church like every week, and he was actually studying to become a priest. And during the studying, he's very intelligent, mashallah. So during the studying, he actually realized that this doesn't make sense, right, about the Trinity and all of that. And he did more research. He eventually stumbled upon Islam with Allah's guidance, and he realized this was the truth, and he became Muslim, alhamdulillah. But now things really have not gotten really easy for him. So there's a lot of anti-Muslim hate in his family, a lot of abuse. He's actually been verbally abused, physically abused as well, after his family suspected that he was Muslim. He doesn't even have any close friends. He feels like he can't even tell anybody outside of any Muslim colleagues or Muslim people that he knows about his religion, because he's worried about the persecution he would have. And the thing that makes it hardest for him, or not the hardest, but the thing that also makes it hard is that he happens to be white, right? He's not brown, right? He's not Asian, he's not black. He happens to be white, which, as we know, is not very, very common, right? In our masjid, we always see a lot of brown people here, and we see a lot of African American brothers and things like that. But we don't see a lot of white brothers. So every time he goes to a masjid, what do you think happens? Right? Everyone starts staring at him, right? And this makes him feel extremely uncomfortable, and this happened pretty recently during Ramadan, and he got very, very upset. He felt like, he didn't even belong there, that people are just judging him, and it really made it very, very difficult for him. And, as humans, it's normal for us to stare at something that's kind of outside of what we're used to. For example, I was driving to Staten Island recently on the Verrazano Bridge, and there was a car toppled over, which I've never seen before, like completely flipped over. So obviously I was looking at it as something, I haven't seen before, right? But it's very different when you're looking at a person, right? People have feelings, and, in our culture sometimes, in certain cultures, it's a thing to like just stare at people, right? And I think many of us know that. But in Western culture, that can be very, very off-putting. It can be very, disrespectful. It can be very, it doesn't create a very friendly atmosphere. So you can imagine if you're someone who just converted to Islam, you're white, so everyone you see is, for example, they're very brown, right, in a masjid, and you come there and everyone's staring at you, you feel very, very unwelcome. And then, so this brother, he went to the masjid, he was stared at, and then he was sitting on the stairs while he was waiting for Asr to come in. And some of the brothers were praying the optional sunnah prayer for Asr, and then he heard them commenting that, oh, there's a white guy sitting on the stairs, and he's not even praying. So now he felt even more isolated. So, if someone goes through that, why would they want to come back to the masjid, right? They feel so off-put by everything. No one even comes up and talks to them. No one smiles at them, right? They just became Muslim. Why would they want to come back to the masjid, right? They might as well just stay at home and pray, or maybe even go away from the deen because they feel like they don't belong, right? So that's the isolation I'm talking about, right? And it's incumbent on us as a community to really welcome our Muslim brothers in, because we don't want anyone to feel like that. And you can imagine how it would feel for us, right? Even when you go to the airport, right, after 9/11, all that stuff happened, if we look, somewhat Muslim, people will be giving us dirty looks, TSA may give us a harder time, and we feel very, very uncomfortable, right? So how would that feel if you had that same kind of feeling when you came into the masjid, right? So that's something we have to always keep in mind whenever we see a new revert brother or sister, no matter what their race is, right? We have to be very, very welcoming to them. And Hassan ibn Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, he said that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was describing some of his characteristics, he said that his gaze wasn't noticeable, which means that he wouldn't stare, right? So it's even a prophetic example not to stare at people, right? Looking is one thing, if you just look at you and look around and whatever, but when you're actually like staring at somebody, that's not part of a good akhlaq. So, I don't know if anyone, who is truly Muslim can understand that feeling of isolation. And even I can't relate to the brother who I was talking about who was getting stared at because I'm brown, right? So even though I converted, people can't tell, right? They often think I'm Paki. They come and speak to me in Urdu and I can't speak Urdu, right? But they come and speak to me and they think I've been Muslim my whole life. So I've never really experienced that same sort of isolation. And there's different levels of isolation, right? For example, think about Ramadan, right? So during Ramadan, many of us have extended family and we get together with our cousins or our brothers and sisters and we break fast together and we have big Eid parties and celebrations. And for reverts, sometimes, you may have friends, but sometimes you may have nobody. So you're breaking fast alone, you're getting up in the morning to eat alone, and that's part of the isolation as well. Eventually, once reverts get married and they have a family of their own, it changes, but still in the beginning it's very, very tough. But may Allah grant all our reverts and all of us righteous spouses, Ameen. But often the main source of support for any of us is our family, and when they don't have them to celebrate Ramadan with, that can be very tough. So let me ask you a question, right? What's the final abode for someone who is not Muslim, right? After this life and after the barzakh and everything, where do people who are not Muslim in general, where do they go? Right? It's not a trick question, right? Jahannam, right? Jahannam, right? In a general sense, people who are not Muslim, will go to Jahannam. We're not talking about people who are truly Christian and following the right religion back in the day and all that stuff. We're talking about people now, right, who are not Muslim, our final abode is Jahannam. Now, again, as a reminder, we can't say that about a specific person, right? We can't say, Brother John is going to go to hell because he's Christian, right? We can't say that, right? We don't know what's in their heart, only Allah knows. So we can't judge any specific person unless Allah has told us we can. For example, Fir'aun, right? We know Fir'aun will be going to Jahannam. The Prophet ﷺ told us about his uncle Abu Talib, right? That he will be he'll be in Jahannam, right? So we know certain people, if Allah tells us that, or the Prophet ﷺ told us that, then we know. But other than that, as a reminder, we can't judge anybody. But in a general sense, we know where people will go. And can you imagine how that would feel for you if your mom or your sister or your brother or your father or any of your family members, if you knew that you became Muslim and they weren't interested, they weren't receptive to dawah, and if they died, that may be where they'll go, right? Like, how would that feel, right? How it's kind of a burden that you have to bear, maybe your whole life, right? Knowing that that may be the final end for your family. That's something that's very, very tough. And I think many of reverts, no matter how much support you have from your wife and children and all of that, that's the kind of isolation that's very, very difficult as well. And just think about, how grieved the Prophet ﷺ was when Abu Talib, when his uncle died, right? So he was his greatest source of support externally during the difficult times in Makkah, when they boycotted him economically and they tried to persecute him. Abu Talib is always the one who defended him. And that's why in the 10th year of prophethood, in the year of sadness, right, when Abu Talib died, it was a huge, huge loss for the Prophet ﷺ. And it's also the year that Khadija, radiallahu anha, died, who was his main source of internal support, right, his private support. So, it shows us how grieved the Prophet was and how important having that support was to him, even though he wasn't Muslim, right? It was a very, very difficult loss for him, and even more so because he wasn't Muslim and he died on disbelief. So I want to talk about a different vulnerable population, not one who exists now, but who existed back in the day, right? So back in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right, and the early Muslims, when they were in Makkah, they were persecuted a lot, right? Some of them were persecuted severely, like Bilal, he was tortured. Some were actually killed, like Sumayya and Yasir. And then the Prophet ﷺ himself was even tortured and persecuted, right? So this isn't something, unfortunately, that's kind of gone away, right? We still have Muslims persecuted in Palestine, in Myanmar. We have, even in China, we have people being put in concentration camps, Muslim brothers, to try and kind of re-brainwash them into following like the Chinese train of thought and stuff like that. So may Allah grant them peace and save them from their situation. Ameen. So the early Muslims, they had this very, very difficult time. So when the opportunity came for them to leave, the Prophet ﷺ advised them to leave. So a group left Abyssinia, right, Ethiopia, and they found some refuge there. But finally, after a base of Muslims was established in Yathrib, which is called Medina, everyone made the hijrah to Medina, which we know, and that was, the starting point for our Islamic calendar, and a very, very huge event in Islamic history, right? So the Muslims, they left, right? They left everything they grew up with from Makkah. They left their houses, they left their wealth, they left their non-Muslim family, everything they ever grew up with. They had to leave and go to this completely new town, a completely new culture, and a completely different situation, right? So they were a very, very vulnerable population, and they were very isolated as well. Very isolated from everything they grew up with, which is, very, very hard to do. So Allah Azza wa Jal, He tells us in the Quran about these two groups of people, right? We have the Muhajirin, who left from Makkah and went to Medina, and then we have the Ansar, right? The Ansar are the people who lived in Medina and who welcomed the Muhajirin in. So Allah says in the Quran, He says in Surah 59, He says, وَالَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارَ وَالْإِيمَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ حَاجَةً مِمَّا أُوتُوا وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ وَمَن يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. So, and those who were settled in the home meaning Medina, and adopted the faith before them, they love those who emigrated to them, meaning the Muhajirin who came from Makkah, and they find not any want in the breast of what they were given, but they give them preference. They give the people in Makkah preference over themselves, even though they're in privation. And whoever is protected from the stinginess of his soul, it is those who will be the successful. So Allah is telling us here how loving and how welcoming the Ansar were in Medina to the people of Makkah who emigrated to them, right? And they were called the Ansar. So Nasara, does anyone know what Nasara means? In Arabic, that verb? Helper, right? Good, so it means helper, right? Nasara means to help. So the Ansar are people who help. That's where the term comes from, right? So they were extremely helpful. They shared their homes, they shared their wealth. One of the companions even offered to divorce one of his wives, so the Muhajirin could have a wife to marry, right? So they were they had a very, very close bond. And the Prophet ﷺ, he even made that bond something bona fide, because he made it so that a Muhajirin and an Ansar were paired up. And when the Ansar died, the Muhajirin would actually inherit from him, which we know now, after the Islamic inheritance laws and things changed, and to what they are now, we know that inheritance is only for family members, right? So it shows you how close that connection really was. So I often think about our reverts like the Muhajirin, right? They left, they didn't leave a physical place, but they left a place of darkness, right? Where they were with their faith and their beliefs. And they left that place to come to Islam, right? To embrace this deen and all of the things they had to give up. They had to give up parts of their family, the connection with their family potentially. They had to give up things they were used to, whether it be drinking or eating pork, or whether it be gambling, or whether it be riba, whatever it is. They had to give up all these things to become Muslim. It's a very, very hard thing to do. And that means we need to be the Ansar, right? Because they are the Muhajirin, and we have to be the people that are helping them into this community. And there's many, many ways to help, right? The simplest way to help is just to be welcoming, right? And the simplest way to welcoming is just to smile and not to stare, right? Not to stare at a new revert when he comes in, and just to smile if we can. Mufti Menk, he said that a smile is a crooked thing that makes so many things straight, right? And that's very true. If you smile, it's automatically welcoming. You don't even have to say a word, but you feel more welcome in a place, right? And I think that's the same for any of us, right? No matter where we're going into. And all really a new revert wants when they come into the community is to be welcomed and to feel like they belong. So here at FCAT and New York City Muslim Center, we have been trying to really welcome our reverts more strongly into our community. And you met some of them yesterday. You met Brother Dejan, you met Brother Yusuf, for those of us who were here yesterday. And we're trying to welcome them and many of the other reverts into our community. So we have a program we have called New Leaf. And we started it, I believe, in December. So we've had a few sessions so far. And the aim of that program is to really welcome these brothers into the community, to teach them the foundation of the religion, the most important things they need to know as a new Muslim. And that's an important piece, of course, knowing the foundation, but it's also important to have a social connection and to have, to try and foster that brotherhood, just like they did in Medina all the many centuries ago. Right? So we've started for a few months. We've been teaching them about things like Tawheed, about heaven and hell, about angel and jinn, right? The very, very basic points of Aqidah that we have to know. But more importantly, we've been offering dinner, we've been just sitting down with them, we've been pairing them with mentors in the community to help guide them and teach them basics about prayer, just be their support for them. So this is something, I ask Allah to really grant us more and more success in making this a bigger program and very, very beneficial for our reverts and for our community. But this is one way that we can get involved, right? We can get involved in coming to New Leaf and coming to meet our reverts and really lending a helping hand and showing them that we really support them as a community. Because we have a beautiful community here, right? We have a very diverse community. And that brother I was telling you about who said he got stared at a lot when he came into the masjid, that wasn't here, right? It wasn't here. It was in a different masjid in Queens, or in Long Island actually, but very close. But he said when he came here, he didn't get stared as much and he felt much more comfortable here, which speaks to our community and how open we are. Right? So when I was talking about the staring and stuff, I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about the ummah, us in general, right? In the whole country. We have to all be more welcoming. But including us here, we all be welcoming here too, because we always have room to improve on. But I think we're doing a good job here of welcoming our reverts in, but we can always try and do better, right? And one thing we can do is coming to New Leaf and being here for our reverts. We have a lot of reverts that come, alhamdulillah, and it's very important to have that bond. And one of my friends who came here, who's a new revert, he said that he felt very, very close and very, very happy once he came to New Leaf and was able to talk with all of us. So I think that's the biggest thing about New Leaf. The knowledge is very important, of course, but so is the social connection that's really, really important. And there are other organizations in Queens and Long Island that have a lot of revert outreach also. So it doesn't just have to be Masjid Isa. If you live farther away, you can find somewhere closer to you that can help with this as well. So there are also going to be opportunities, inshallah, to support reverts in other ways, like financially, right? So places offer scholarships, for example, for reverts to learn more Islamic education and gain that knowledge base. And even NYCMC, we're going to be starting a scholarship program soon for our reverts to, be able to attend the ADP program for free. And I learned a lot personally from the ADP program. I felt like I had some knowledge before, but after I came to ADP, it was much more solidified. I felt more comfortable in the deen. I feel like they do a good job of teaching us what we need to know as Muslims in general. And as new Muslims, of course, you have to know all this stuff and really have a good foundation. And I think it really gives a good foundation. So really true to its namesake, right? Foundation for Knowledge and Development. So really true to its namesake. So I think what we have here is something special. So we really have to try and help as much as we can. So if that means we can help financially when this scholarship program is announced, then we should try and do that, inshallah. Even if it's a little bit of money, whatever we can give can go a long way. And again, the main thing is just being smiling and being welcoming, right? Because if it wasn't for the akhlaq and the manners of my friends, I don't know if, obviously Allah guides, but I think that played a huge role in me becoming Muslim, right? Because of how they acted towards me and what kind of hospitality they showed and manners. So just a few key points, we're almost done. A few key points we can take away from today's talk. So first, don't overburden a new Muslim, right? So look at when the Quran was revealed, right? What kind of verses were revealed in the Quran in the beginning? Right? Can anyone name some of the verses that were revealed in the beginning? So Iqra, right? So Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, right? That's the first verse, right? Let me see, like what kind of themes were revealed at the time? May this be an easier question. Like,
basically rewards and punishments.
right, rewards and punishments, right? That's a huge part of it, rewards and punishments. What about Surah Al-Ikhlas, right? That was revealed early on too, which is all about who is Allah, right? That's what Surah Al-Ikhlas is, right? It talks about Jahannam and heaven, Jahannam and Jannah. It talks about the punishments there and the rewards there, right? It talks about the things of the unseen, talks about angels, talks about jinn, right? And then it talks about the stories of old, right? The people of Hud and people of Lut. All of these things are the Meccan Quran, right? It's the surahs and the ayahs that are revealed in Makkah. Right? There's no talk about keeping your beard, right? There's no talk about keeping your pants short, or talk about praying zakah, or fasting even, right? Hajj. None of that. That's all in once the Muslims went to Medina, all of these things started coming in. Same thing with the punishment in the dunya. Like if you steal, what is the punishment? If you fornicate, what's the punishment? All of these things were much more revealed in Medina. So just through that, we can see that Allah is teaching us what we need to focus on first when you become Muslim. It needs to be on aqidah, right? And what that really means, who is Allah, what is our belief as Muslims. So that's why when a person becomes Muslim, we shouldn't be overburdening them with things like keeping the beard or how they dress, even things like drinking or gambling. We have to obviously advise them, right? Once you're Muslim, those things suddenly, they instantly become haram on you, right? Of course. But we shouldn't force, we can't pressure them to give everything up right away, right? That'll make them feel more isolated and draw them away, right? So we have to make sure they have a good foundation first, and then little by little you start doing it, right? And it's very easy to judge someone on the outward appearance, right? So like that brother I told you about, my friend who's white and went to the masjid and got stared at, right? He keeps saying, oh, I'm such a good Muslim, and you're so religious and all this stuff, and what he sees is me keeping the beard, right? Or maybe keeping my pants short when I go to work and stuff like that. But that's all an outward appearance, right? Allah knows what's really in my heart. Allah knows in any of our hearts, right? How strong our iman is. And all of us who have beards or dressing Islamically or whatever we're doing this to try and please Allah, right? To try and get close to Allah. We're not doing it to show off how religious we are, right? That should not be our intention, right? So we should all be, new Muslims will always look at other people and they may judge them on the outward appearance, which is common and normal as humans. But we have to remember that outward appearance is not the most important thing. So we have to focus with new Muslims on Aqidah, Tawheed, prayer, right? Focusing on prayer. And then step by step, you start, focusing on more and more relatively minor manners. So I think that's very, very important. And, what I think of an analogy to that is if you have children, right? And they're 2 or 3 years old, are you going to teach them how to do their taxes? Right? No, right? You're not going to teach them how to do taxes. You're going to teach them how to speak, what's right and what's wrong, right? You shouldn't be hitting people, right? You should be sharing, right? You focus on basic things, and then later on you teach other things that are more important, that are important as you get older, right? But you always start with the basics. So this is what we need to focus on with our reverts, right? Because Tawheed is very, very important, right? They may know Allah is one, right? But what does that mean, right? Does that mean that even though Allah is one, can I still have a lucky charm, right? Can I cross my fingers? Can I knock on wood if I say something to make sure I don't jinx myself, right? Is that how is that negating that Allah is one, right? It doesn't always make sense right away. It may make sense to us, but it doesn't make sense to a revert necessarily. Or what about in the Sistine Chapel, right? Michelangelo painted all this stuff, and he painted the picture of God, astaghfirullah, as like a human, right? They may be like, what's wrong with that? Allah is God, but why can't he look like a human, right? What's wrong with that? This is what I grew up envisioning God as. So these kind of Aqidah points are extremely important for them to really know from the beginning, and that's where we need to really focus on. And second, reverts from a different race really need that much more care, and especially like I was mentioning, white reverts. I think they get the most stares, or reverts with tattoos, for example, when they come into the masjid, right? Or reverts with dreadlocks. Reverts who look different from the quote-unquote normal, right? Like the normal with the kufi and the beard or whatever, right? So we have to be especially more welcoming to them because they feel that much more isolated when they come into a place like the masjid. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told us that in his final sermon, there's no difference between our races, right? He was telling us that the main difference between us in the sight of Allah is in piety, right? So that shows us that we really have to be, really open to everyone because we're all equal in this dunya. And then lastly, in Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah said that He created us in different tribes so we can know one another. And those of us who are here for Brother Zakaria's Taraweeh talk, he talked about this, right? So Allah created us in these different, races and tribes and cultures and all this stuff so we can really get to know one another. And that's one of the beauties of having Muslims from different walks of life come here. We can really benefit. So even more reasons to welcome them to our community because even we can benefit from the experience that they have to offer us. So may Allah Azza wa Jalla allow us to really reach out and be an ansar to our new reverts who are like the Muhajirin. And may He allow us to show them what true Islam is in our knowledge, but especially in our manners. And may Allah Azza wa Jalla accept all our deeds during this great month, and may He enter us all into Jannah al-Firdaus without account. Allahumma ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
In the new wave, so do you also have any ideas volunteers who want to, be like say, you give example of